How would you describe the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline? Let's think about this. You've got this giant pipeline. There's Nord Stream 1, by the way, and Nord Stream 2. And they stretch 760 miles from the northwest coast of Russia all the way to a place called Lublin in northeastern Germany. And somebody put explosives, and this was around the area where the pipeline goes close to Norway, and boom, blew up the pipeline. The pipeline has been crippled, it's been damaged. And I think there's only one word or two words to describe what happened: international terrorism. Somebody did that, and it's either, well, I suppose you could also call it an act of war, but it's one or the other. Now, when this first happened, there was almost a kind of unanimous chorus in the Western media: the Russians did it. And on the face of it, this is absurd. The Russians benefit from the Nord Stream pipeline. They pushed hard for the building of the pipeline. They negotiated and got the deal with Germany. They make a lot of money off the pipeline. It creates also politically German dependence on Russia. So the Russians have no reason to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Well, the Western press was like, yeah, well, they do. They're doing it because they want to make it look like we did it. So they're doing it to score points. And even though it's kind of like someone, beating themselves up in the face and then saying, oh, my boyfriend abused me. So they were implying that this was Putin's motive for doing this. Well, it was never really all that believable, but these days, much of what we hear in the Western press is not believable. In fact, it's propaganda that is sown by the intelligence agencies. Then several weeks ago, Seymour Hersh, a lifelong leftist, did a bombshell post on his Substack, I believe, but certainly he did a blog post basically saying, I have evidence that the United States Navy divers from Florida blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And he gave a lot of detail, it came out of nowhere. The most he was able to do is point to sources that were inside the U.S. government that told him this. And then there was a kind of long silence, the media sort of not touching this article. It's sort of radioactive, even though Seymour Hersh has a record of breaking major stories. I believe he broke the story of the My Lai massacre in the Vietnam era. Nevertheless, this article has gone, you may say, untouched by the Western media. I talked about it on the podcast, but its coverage has been very muted. And now something very interesting from the New York Times, quote, intelligence suggests pro-Ukrainian groups sabotage pipelines, U.S. officials say. Now, according to this New York Times article, a huge change, obviously, for the first time here is a major media outlet acknowledging our side blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, but they're saying not Biden, and they're saying not even Zelensky. They're saying this is not something that was done by kind of Ukrainian officials per se, but some kind of renegade Ukrainian group. U.S. officials said there was much they did not know about the perpetrators and their affiliations. They did not specify the members of the group or who directed or paid for the operation. They implied was, quote, a proxy force with connections to the Ukrainian government. Now, first of all, I want to contrast the precision of detail in the Seymour Hersh article with the absence of detail, the vague insinuations. Well, yeah, it was the Ukrainians, but no, it wasn't really the Zelensky people. In fact, they don't even know who it was. It was some Ukrainian group, but we don't know which group. This is all extremely fishy. And another thing that's worth noting here is that Seymour Hersh is not named in the New York Times article. They give no credit. They make no reference, even though I think it is manifestly obvious that they would not have written this article if it wasn't for Hersh's article. It's Hersh's article that put the truth, I think it's the truth, on the table. And then the intelligence community was like, whoa, now we've been going with this lie and we rely on these gullible or sneaky U.S. media jackals who have no commitment to truth, who are professional liars. And they're very happy to go with our lying narrative. But now this guy Hersh, this old school leftist, has like blown our cover. So we need a fallback narrative. What am I saying here? What I'm saying here is that this new narrative is also cooked up. Let's look here. How does the New York Times know any of this? Quote, new intelligence reviewed by U.S. officials. Who are these U.S. officials? It's certainly not the Secretary of State. It's certainly not KJP, the press secretary. No, these are people in the same intelligence agencies that sowed the first lie. They're now coming back with, let's call it, the fallback lie. So the fallback lie is, we didn't do it, Zelensky didn't do it, but it was some renegade group. Now, why do I not believe a word of this? Because no renegade Ukrainian group could have done this without, I won't say without Ukrainian support, but without U.S. support and without Western allied support. So is it conceivable that Zelensky could have done it on his own and is denying? It's possible, but I think unlikely. Why? Because you're talking about a pipeline that actually runs very far away from Ukraine. You're talking about a pipeline that is underwater with an extremely heavy Western military presence hovering over it. So Seymour Hersh's narrative is that the Norwegians worked with U.S. intelligence to identify a vulnerable spot where the pipeline could be blown up. That makes total sense. On the other hand, a bunch of random Ukrainians decide, oh, you know what, let's put on our swimsuits and our diving uniform. Let's go around Norway and do this without the U.S. knowing about it, there is no way it happened that way. So what I'm trying to say to you is we're getting something that is closer to the truth, but is also a lie. Maybe not as big a lie as the original one peddled by the intelligence community, but let's call it a second order lie. And if we're skeptical, and we have to be skeptical these days in the way in which we read the news, we'll realize that just as we didn't really fall for the first lie, we shouldn't fall for the second one either.